Hello everyone, my name is Pixlriffs and welcome back to the Minecraft Survival Guide. I hope you're all having a good day. In today's episode, I'm going to catch you up on a couple of changes I have made here in the storage hall, a couple of additions before we move on. First of all, we've actually got bubble elevators and safe water drops up to and down from the villager trading hall. So I can step into any of the 4 columns that you see here surrounded by trapdoors. We've got the fence gates sticking out a little bit here, but those are there to hold the water back and allow the player through, because the bubble column down there, powered by a block of soul sand, is going to be what propels us up to the top floor here, so I don't have to keep wasting fireworks every time I want to come up here to my villager trading hall. Of course, we could have done that in a number of other ways, ladders, scaffolding, anything like that, but the water columns are nice and quick, and we can of course fall down into a waterlogged chest block, and in this case it's an ender chest since I have a decent supply of those now, and then I can access an ender chest from basically anywhere in my storage hall. There will only ever be one within about 16 blocks away from wherever I am standing in this room. So I'm quite happy about that change. I can get up and down from the trading hall nice and easily without wasting rockets. I've also made a change to this wall here, because after we organized the ender chest in the previous episode, I noticed I had 24 shulker shells left, and that would make 12 shulker boxes, and I needed 12 to fill out this panel of the wall here. And so these are my dye shulker boxes right now. These are the ones that I've been stashing a bunch of the dyes in, and a few dyed items that don't have a more permanent home. And behind this is a wall of wool that indicates which color shulker box goes where, so that I can put them all back in the same places once I'm done using them. But in the process of doing that, I noticed I don't really have a whole lot of some of these dyes. Naturally, there are going to be some that I have a whole lot of, for example the red dye, because of course we've been getting plenty of poppies from the iron farm since the early days, but those are now being composted on a more permanent basis, so I won't have a supply of red dye from that forever, and there is a chance that we'll need a lot of red dye in future. Naturally, green dye we have a great deal of as well, because that is getting produced by the cactus farm pretty much constantly. Or if not the cactus farm itself, since that just produces the plants, I have got a super smelter array in here which has been producing green dye for me in the background, so that I can make a bunch of it for episodes like this. And of course, white dye. Well, I don't have a great deal of it in here, but I've naturally been gathering bones and bone blocks from the early days of setting up a skeleton spawner, and all it takes is converting those into bone meal, and we can convert it a stack at a time into white dye, and we will have plenty of that lying around. Of course, in combination, white dye and green are going to make light green, so we have that department covered. Even though there is currently none in that shulker box, I can make that 2 stacks at a time just by combining it in my inventory like this, so we will not have a shortage of lime dye anytime soon. And likewise, pink can be combined from red and white to make a bunch of pink dye, so I'm not too worried about those. But the remaining colors around here are colors that I will need to acquire in larger quantities, and we can do that in a number of different ways. Some of the dyes, such as yellow dye, can be produced from the 2-block tall flowers that I've already put in my ender chest. If we grab the plant box from inside of here, sunflowers can be used to create yellow dye, roses will produce red dye, lilacs and peonies will produce magenta and pink dye respectively. But there are other flowers out there that will produce a whole variety of dyes like this. We'll be able to get hold of blue dye from cornflowers. We can actually get light blue from the flowers that are grown in the swamp, the blue orchids. We can find tulips, which will get us not only orange dye, but also red, pink, and light grey. It's interesting that white is not a color that appeared in flowers until the lily of the valley was added. Cyan dye can technically be acquired from pitcher pods, but pitcher pods aren't grown in the same way that other flowers are. They are very specifically a product of sniffers finding the seeds for us. But we're going to start a few different flower farm designs today, and the objective is to get hold of these flowers for decoration, but also to acquire a large-scale quantity of each of the dyes they provide. And once again, it's a good thing that we have a huge supply of bones, because we're going to be using a lot of bone meal in these projects. But these are redstone farms that you can more or less set up once, knowing that every time you come back to them, you'll be able to produce as much dye as you need. In future episodes, we will look at farms for the more specialized dyes, like brown, which you can only get from cocoa beans, and black dye, which you can get from either squid ink or wither roses. But for today, we'll focus on the flowers that are nearby, and fortunately enough, we live close to a flower forest biome. On the way down from the meadow here, and this is a meadow that seems to mainly produce cornflowers, there is a hillside that has a smattering of other flowers, including alliums. These are a unique flower that can produce magenta dye on their own, but as we walk through the forest here, you will find there are different patches of lots of different types of flowers. The azure bluets you will find typically on plains alongside dandelions, poppies, and oxeye daisies, as well as the occasional cornflower, but right here on this hillside we have a bunch of tulips, both red and orange. So this flower forest is going to be a great place to start our flower farm because we have an abundant amount of all of these different flowers that are going to produce different dyes for us. Once you find a patch of the flowers you want, you can bone meal the area to see if any more grow, and that way you can sort of find where the outline of the growing area for that type of flower is, because if you get a few blocks further away, you'll find that maybe some different types of flowers end up growing there. This patch of alliums might become a patch of cornflowers or lily of the valley. Now the thing I'm curious about in this flower forest biome is if we pillar up a few blocks and create a platform of grass above the area of the flower forest, are we still going to get the same patch of flowers? What we're going to get is some rain, which hopefully the flowers will like. But yes, there we go. If we are up in the air above this little patch of tulips, it seems like we are still generating tulips here. So this way you can either choose to integrate your flower farms with the natural landscape, or you can pillar up and set up a platform above an area that you know is growing the type of flower that you want. And with a little bit of testing here, we can see where the edges of this tulip field are, and we can see where the edges of this allium field are. It seems like the azure bluets connect the two of these, but if we find the right little area where these two patches of flowers can overlap, we might be able to set up a farm that can generate alliums, azure bluets, and both colors of tulips, along with any other flower types that might be growing in the same area. Once you've located an area that has the flowers you want, here's what we're going to do. We're going to grab 30 blocks of grass, and of course you can always carve this out of the landscape instead of building your own platform if you want to, but we're going to build this out into a 6x5 area of grass blocks. And then we're going to spam this area with bone meal a couple of times just to make sure the right types of flowers are growing on the surface of this grass platform. We got some alliums there, and we've got a couple of azure bluets over here, but the alliums are the main one I want. If we get a little bit of grey dye from the azure bluets, then that's totally fine. It does seem like it's only this corner that's growing the azure bluets though, so maybe we will cut off one side of this platform and add that to the other side so we get a bit more of a balance. There we go, we've got a few more growing on this side now. So that looks like a decent area to build our flower farm. I'm going to dip into the redstone box here in my ender chest, and we're going to grab 2 observers, a single repeater, a bunch of redstone dust, and a dispenser. We're also going to grab a couple of hoppers so that we can set up a mechanism that's going to feed bone meal into this dispenser as it uses it. We're also going to need 10 pistons. And as usual, I'm going to avoid putting redstone dust on any natural blocks just in case we want to terraform some of the area, but I think it's going to be a fun idea to use the wool colors that each of the flowers in this farm will provide for us. So azure bluets will get us light grey, and alliums will get us magenta. Gonna grab about half a stack of each of these, and that way we can kind of color code these farms so we know which one we're activating and which one is going to get us the results we want. The first thing we're going to do here is come out 1 block from the edge of our grass platform and place a row of supporting wool blocks. Then facing towards the grass platform, we'll position these 5 pistons like so. We're going to come out 2 blocks on the opposite side. I'll put the light grey wool on this side simply because this is the side that's going to have the azure bluets growing on it, and we'll place the other 5 pistons against those wool blocks so there is a 1 block gap between them and the grass platform. We're going to run some redstone dust along each of these so that the blocks themselves are going to end up powering the pistons. Then at each end we're going to come down 1 block and in towards a central clock that's going to be running the farm for us. We'll put a sticky piston below floor level here and have a lever there to activate and deactivate the sticky piston that's going to turn the farm on and off. And then on top of that, we're going to have an observer facing into another observer on the top here to create an observer clock. If I place some redstone dust on either side of this right now, you'll notice those are blinking in an alternating pattern. And if we activate and then deactivate the sticky piston, they will do it twice as fast. That's going to be the speed at which this farm runs. Now, if we connect both sides of this up to their respective redstone lines, you'll notice the pistons start firing really quickly, but only one set of pistons can fire because it effectively blocks the other side from firing. The way we resolve that is to put a single redstone repeater with no additional delay into one half of the circuit, and that will actually offset the redstone signal to the point where each of these pistons fires in an alternating pattern that allows the grass floor of the farm to shift back and forth. Just for the sake of consistency here, I'm going to make sure that this lever is attached to a wool block. There we go. And we're going to take another row of wool blocks out into the center of the farm, which is where we're going to put our dispenser. And this is a 5x6 platform, so there is no true center, but the center is going to be shifting back and forth over this block here. So we're going to place a dispenser facing upwards like this. We're going to take the redstone signal coming from this observer here, and we're going to run that into a block next to the dispenser to make sure the dispenser receives a constant cycle of power. Now when we activate the farm, in addition to the noise of the pistons, we can also hear the noise of the dispenser clicking. Now we completely fill the dispenser with bone meal, and I brought a few bone blocks with me to make sure that we can do that. A stack of bone blocks will fill a dispenser in its entirety. Now we're going to pull the lever to activate the farm, and yeah, it looks like the dispenser isn't actually firing on the correct cycle, so this is something we need to be aware of. A lot of the times you'll set these up and they'll be able to work first time, but something about the timing between these two observers and the way the farm is shifting is preventing the dispenser from firing correctly. Here's one thing we can try to resolve that. Move the repeater to the opposite side. We've got plenty of room here to insert the repeater into this grey wool line. Let's see if that makes any difference to how our farm operates. Yep. Now it's working. So it seems like the dispenser output being on the same side as the repeater was causing a kind of sync offset between the firing of the pistons and the firing of the dispenser, which meant that it couldn't generate new flowers. But with the repeater on this side, it looks like that's how it works. And as you can see, there are now a bunch of alliums, azure bluets, and wheat seeds up here for us to collect. In fact, the farm gets pretty explosive, and that's primarily because when the flowers generate, the farm is already shifting over, and some of the entities get caught in the blocks and get pushed out in different angles. So you'll sometimes find that you get items dropping below the farm here, but the majority of them are going to be flung outwards and sometimes off to the sides. But I'm going to turn my block sounds down a little bit so I can run this farm a little longer, and as you can see, it generates a bunch of azure bluets and alliums. That's going to be enough to fill up our inventory before long. In fact, I already have over a stack just from running the farm a couple of times, and I've got half a stack of azure bluets, which is a decent ratio, I think, for this area. And if you're lucky with your flower forest generation, you might even be able to find an area where 2, 3, or even 4 types of flowers overlap in the same 5x6 area, and this shifting floor farm is an invaluable asset in that case. Of course, this is going to chew through the bone meal in this dispenser quite rapidly if you leave the farm running for any length of time. So one thing you might want to do is add a couple of hoppers to the dispenser, have them come out to one side of the farm like so, and simply put a barrel full of bone meal on top of that. Or a double chest if you've got the room for it, and that's going to allow that to refill the dispenser anytime it uses up bone meal, allowing the farm to run for a lot longer. We could also, if we wanted to, craft a bunch of extra composters, and that way any byproducts of this farm that you don't intend to use, such as the wheat seeds here, could be composted nearby, allowing for bone meal to refill these dispensers. And we might even get to a point where we can hook up a full bone meal farm to some flower farms like this, which would allow for this farm to run constantly. It would basically never run out of the bone meal it needed to produce flowers. For now, though, I'm going to settle for making the farm look a little prettier, because as of this moment, it is just a flat platform sticking out from the hillside in my flower forest. But that's nothing a bit of spruce and oak wood can't fix. So now we've got a nice spruce frame with some stripped oak in there to make the farm look a little bit nicer, make it stand out a little bit, but still make it feel natural as part of the environment. The last thing I'm going to do is consider filling in the floor underneath this to make sure that we don't end up with any plants getting lost underneath the farm, especially where there are gaps like this next to the pistons, because the pistons are going to have to come to rest here and then drops can fall down through the middle. So we might want to just lay in a set of blocks underneath this just to make sure that drops don't end up falling through there. By the same token, we are going to put a row of slabs across here, and I'm using slabs since they are a non-full block, so they won't cut off the redstone signal to the redstone on either side. And we're just going to lay that in here. Shouldn't disturb the redstone at all, but will give us a platform to walk down in and not have to worry about stepping over the redstone when we do. I've also set up a little easy composter setup, just a single hopper, single composter. We can obviously double up on that if we want to, and that's where I'm going to be chucking in the wheat seeds and any other redundant drops from the farm. And now all we have to do is pull this lever, and the farm's going to generate a ton of flowers and seeds for us. And as I mentioned before, each of these flowers is getting turned into their respective dyes, so we have a plentiful supply of each. In the same area, we're going to set up farms for the 4 2-block tall flowers that we can reproduce by bone mealing them. The roses, sunflowers, lilacs, and peonies. And the setup for those farms is even simpler. We'll need a block of mud to plant them on, and we'll need some of the same redstone components, obviously a dispenser to provide bone meal, hoppers to collect the flowers in this case, and something to store them in. We're going to plant each of these flowers on a mud block because that's actually going to allow a hopper to collect any flowers that drop on the block from below them. And that's thanks to mud being a non-full block. If you step onto a mud block, you'll notice you're ever so slightly lower than you are standing on a full block nearby. So we'll put some barrels here at ground level. We'll have the hoppers facing into each of those. We'll have the rose here, the sunflower next to that. Unfortunately, it's facing away from us, but hey, what can you do? We've got the peony right there and the lilac finally over there. We can have the dispensers pointing at basically any face of these 2-block tall flowers, but we're going to have them all facing from the bottom row here, so it's easy to load them up with bone meal. Although I'm going to avoid putting the hoppers directly into the top of the dispensers, just in case any of the entities pop off and land in the gap between the hopper and the dispenser. So instead, the hoppers that are going to be loading the bone meal into the dispensers will just be attached to the back like so, and we can fill this top part here with a solid block. As before, we're going to frame these out in spruce wood, and we can put some glass in front. And maybe we'll have some stairs supporting the glass at the front, just so we still have access to the barrels. We're going to have a barrel on top of each of these hoppers so that we can fill the barrel up with bone meal to feed into the dispenser, and then we don't need to really interact with the dispenser at all. Just got to load each barrel up with 9 stacks of bone meal, and each of the dispensers will be ready. Now, just like our shifting floor farm, these farms are going to be powered by an observer clock, and we could rig it up so that each of these can be fired individually, so that if we don't want a bunch of red dye, then we can just focus on the sunflowers, the peonies, or the lilacs. But I think for the sake of simplicity here, we're just going to wire all of these together. Any excess flowers that we don't want can always be composted, so I don't really see the harm in doing that. So we're just going to run a line of redstone dust across each of these logs that are directly over the top of the dispensers. That's going to run into a simple vertically oriented observer clock right here, which is going to provide redstone power to this entire line. With the sticky piston underneath there, all we have to do is pull this lever, and each of these flowers receives bone meal. All of their drops end up falling onto the mud, getting collected by the hoppers and falling into the chest below. It's unlikely that any of those drops will ever escape through the top of the farm, especially since the bone meal is happening at the ground level, but I'm going to lay a row of oak slabs over the top of here just for the purposes of closing off the farm. Of course, this is going to make orange dye really easy to acquire as well, because the rose bushes and sunflowers can be broken down into their respective dyes and then combined to make orange. The peonies will get us pink as well, and the lilacs will get us magenta, similarly to the alliums. Of course, these farms aren't necessarily all that redundant, because you might want the alliums and lilacs for decoration as well. They are really unique looking flowers that you don't tend to see outside of flower forests. So I'm going to use those to top up my plant box as well, because there's going to be plenty of use for decoration further down the line. Now, the great thing about these shifting floor flower farms is that they don't just have to be used to generate flowers, they can also be used to generate nether foliage, and that's going to really upgrade our tree farming setup here, where it's kind of a pain bone mealing the nylium every time we want to generate more warped and crimson fungi. I've set up exactly the same shifting floor design over here using the warped and crimson planks as decoration, and right now it's just going to produce whatever flowers are available here in this plains biome, which is mostly dandelions and cornflowers. But all we have to do is swap out the 2 central blocks here, the one above the dispenser and the one that will be shifted over the top of the dispenser, for warped and crimson nylium. And even though the surrounding blocks are grass, that doesn't actually matter, because bone mealing nylium will spread the nether foliage to any grass or netherrack type blocks around. Once we pull the lever, you'll notice a ton of nether foliage starts generating. And since the nether's equivalent of grass just drops itself instead of seeds, we end up with a bunch of warped and crimson roots. Those are going to go back into a composter to once again feed bone meal back into this farm. But in that time we were running the farm, we ended up with 15 warped fungi that I'm going to plant here on my tree farming field, and 13 crimson fungi, a pretty balanced amount, showing that it's not just bone mealing one of the 2 blocks, because that would favor one type of foliage over the other. It actually spreads bone meal to both of them. And naturally, if we wanted to, our group of allays could come in really handy here as well. We could simply assign each of them to pick up the warped and crimson roots, and they'd be able to deliver it to this composting setup, which would feed bone meal back into the farm in time. We could use allays for the same thing over at the flower forest farm, or alternatively, you could assign each of them to a different type of flower and just have them feed them to the player, so you can just stand there and receive the flowers instead of having to run around the platform and pick everything up. I'm going to keep the allays over here assigned to tree farming, but mostly because tree farming for the warped and crimson types just got a lot easier. But folks, with this now as a permanent setup for our tree farm here and the pillagers approaching as I close out the episode, we're going to say thank you so much for watching this episode of the Minecraft Survival Guide. My name has been Pixlriffs. Don't forget to leave a like on this video if you enjoyed it, subscribe if you want to see more, and I'll see you folks soon. Take care. Bye for now.